So, as a classical musician, I'm familiar with Mozart and Haydn and the European composers during the American Revolution, but can you tell me a little bit more about American music during that revolution?
Okay, so when I talk about this, I like to start with the fact that, of course, there was music here before the Europeans came. You know, the Indian tribes, the native tribes had their own songs and dances, their own instruments. They used music for their ceremonial purposes, for their religious purposes, to pass along lore of the tribe. When the Europeans came, they brought their own music with them. They brought classical music. Of course, there was folk music of all kinds. The Europeans, in a way of preserving their culture, brought their own music with them from Scotland and Ireland and England and Germany. And those songs were performed here. Singing was hugely popular in the American
Portable,
colonies. It was portable. There was nothing electric.
Right.
So basically you had drinking and singing and dancing.
Right.
And usually one led to the other. Right. So music was central to life in the colonies. Everyone sang. They got together and they sang in their bars. They had singing clubs. They sang in their homes. And then the musicians would also play for dancing. And that was a huge part of colonial life as well. Probably the most important function during just the regular colonial life before the war was religious.
Oh, yes, of course.
The biggest use of singing in the colonies was singing in the churches.
Yeah.
And so, for example, the larger, richer churches in the north, you know, they might have had a music master, they might have had an organ, they had instruments, they had choirs. They would sing psalms and they would sing hymns. We also had singing in the churches in the south. Sometimes not as rich, especially out here. And you might have churches that had no instruments at all and no music master, but the congregation still sang. The other use of music, especially in the slave community, was, I mean, again, the Africans brought their own music too. You know, they brought their music, they brought instruments. There was, again, kind of a call and response often. Unfortunately, there weren't any musical historians who wrote down what they did. That sort of came in the 19th century. But we do know that they had music, and they used it for their cultural life, for their ceremonies, and also to provide, you know, provide support and a beat while you're working, say, in a field. And then, of course, as we evolved into the 19th century, that became the spirituals, which in their own way became hugely important as they became kind of coded messages on how to escape from a plantation.
And it is also, I believe, where we get the banjo, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. When we talk, yes, the banjo is essentially a drum with strings on it, and it came from Africa, along with other rhythm instruments. There's a painting from about 1790 that shows a banjo player playing, and he's in front of the slave quarters, and in the distance you can see the White House. And there's a book written by a songwriter who's black in Nashville, and she talks about the fact that basically, you know, many people describe country music as a mixture of African music, of Celtic music, and of Christian evangelism. And she talks about that picture. And she says, you know, there he is. You see the White House in the background. Is this the beginning of country music?
What role did it play in the revolution itself?
So, leading up to the revolution, there were a number of songs that became anthems for the revolutionary cause. I'll start with a couple of, there were some British songs that were used in the British Army or the British Navy that patriots rewrote for their own purposes. A classic example of that is the song the British Grenadiers, you know, bum 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 ba-da-dum ba-da-dum bum ba-da-da-da-dum.
Yeah, yeah.
And that was the official march of the Royal Navy. Still is, and excuse me, of the Royal Grenadiers.
Right, yeah.
And it was also the official march of the Royal Fusiliers who were here at Cowpens. One of the great patriots, Dr. Joseph Warren, took that song and rewrote the lyrics to make it an inspiring song for the patriot cause. And Warren himself was a great patriot. He was head of the Minutemen. He sent Paul Revere and William Dawes on their famous ride. And he fought in the Battle of Bunker Hill and sadly was shot and killed on that battle. And Abigail Adams said when Warren died, liberty wept. He was that important to the cause. But he had written that song as a way of inspiring the patriot cause, and it became one of the marches of the American Army. The most famous one is, of course, Yankee Doodle.
Sure, yes.
And Yankee Doodle has a really interesting story.
Yeah.
So it started off as a British song, written supposedly by a doctor named Richard Shuckburgh. And Shuckburgh was a doctor in the British Army during the French and Indian War. And so Shuckburgh was very disgusted with the disorganization of the American troops, of their lack of military discipline. So it was a very insulting song.
Of course.
And it continued to be a song up to revolutionary times by which the British would mock the Americans.
Okay.
When they marched to Lexington and Concord, their band was playing Yankee Doodle. They lost that battle, as we know, and they had to retreat back to Boston.
Right.
And after that, the Americans adopted that song as our own badge of honor and pride, and would sing it back at the British. And
So
just
they owned it. They owned it.
They owned it.
Yeah.
And there are dozens of verses. Some of them make fun of John Hancock. Some of them make fun of George Washington. The version that's come down to us today, Yankee Doodle went to town riding on a pony, stuck a feather in his cap, and called it macaroni.
Yeah.
That was actually really insulting to Americans. Do you know this story?
A little bit, yeah.
All right, so first of all, doodle meant kind of a fool or a simpleton. Dandy, of course, it meant that he was very particular about his dress. And the feather thing and the macaroni thing wasn't about noodles. There was this group in London in the 1760s and 1770s who were kind of the foppish, dandy hipsters of London. And they called themselves macaronis. And they had these absurdly tall wigs, often like a little tiny hat perched on the top. And they would wear really extravagant outfits, often like with a big garland of flowers and that kind of thing. And they were mocked by British press and by British society. And so when the song said that Yankee Doodle stuck a feather in his cap and called it macaroni, it was like doubly insulting.
Right.
Because on the one hand, he's trying to be like these London dandies.
Right.
And he can't even get that right. He doesn't even have the correct wig. He's just got a feather.
Yeah.
So these songs became anthems of the American cause. And the bands in the Revolution played these songs as they marched. They became marches. And
you say band, like what instruments were they?
So, well, there's great variety, and it sort of depended on how they were used. There was a version of military band that was often 8 instruments, maybe a couple of oboes, a couple of clarinets, some French horns, and that would play sort of concerts, what they called harmony music. But on the battlefield, there were different varieties, but usually each company in an army had at least 2 musicians in that company. For a regular infantry, they would have, say, a fife player and a drum.
Yeah.
And those instruments went with them wherever they would go. And they were hugely important. In fact, the musicians were paid better than to the regular infantrymen.
As it should be.
Right, of course, of course. I mean, we're not surprised by that, right? That's so real nowadays.
Right, yeah.
But they were basically the communications tool. They were the communications unit of the Army. Because in a battle, the commander could not be heard. The human voice couldn't be heard above the din of the battle.
Yeah.
And so he would have his musicians right next to him. And he would relay the orders to them, and then they would pass them along. There was a different drum pattern for everything you wanted to do. If you wanted the Army to turn right, it might be a single stroke followed by a flam, which is sort of a bum-bum. So you'd hear bum-bum-bum.
Yeah.
That's turn right. Turn left was bum-bum-bum-bum.
Yeah.
About face right was bum-bum-bum-bum-bum. And there was a drum signal for basically everything you wanted the Army to do. March fast, march slow, fire, retreat. Each of those had a pattern that was played out in the drums. There were other instruments as well. For example, in the cavalry, you couldn't very well carry a drum or even a fife. You need a hand free to control the horse. And so, as is common, they either had, say, a bugle or the sort of 18th century version of a trumpet that they would carry with them.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. And then, there were other instruments that would just show up. Like here at Cowpens, we had Scottish Highlanders as one of the units on the British side. And you can guess what they were playing.
Right. Bagpipes.
Bagpipes,
Yeah,
exactly.
of course,
In fact, when they attacked the American flank, their bagpipes were squealing loudly when they did that.
Oh, great.
So the musicians, their most important function was to give orders. There was different musical patterns for gathering firewood, for assembly of the troops, for going to bed. So all these musicians would come together in the morning and march through camp playing this really annoying reveille.
That'll get you up.
It would get you up and you'd want to kill them. And they'd march all the way through the camp doing this.
That's great.
Yeah, so they had that function. And then, of course, they had marches that they played to set a beat for the Army as they were marching.
Sure. So here's an odd question. If there's that many, let's say, snare drums or fifes or trumpets going, how do you know which one is for you?
That is a great question.
Or the enemy or something.
And it's one I've puzzled over. But I guess the din of the whole battle was loud enough that the one nearest to you maybe was the one you followed.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah.
And it's a very good question, and sort of a related point. I have read that in some places the armies were so close to each other when they're not fighting, but when they were, say, in camp, that musicians on the Patriot side would learn tunes by hearing them from the musicians being played on the British side.
So you had to be really quiet when you practice, right? Yeah,
that's right. One thing I didn't mention is a lot of these musicians were either really old or really young.
Okay.
The sort of image of the young drummer boy actually is based in reality. There were a lot of young boys. Sometimes their father was in the unit, and they were part of the camp followers following along.
Yeah.
And they were too young to, carry a musket or fight. So much of the fighting was hand to hand, but they could carry a drum and beat out the patterns. And the commander wanted them right next to him for the reasons I've mentioned.
Sure.
And he had them in a distinctive uniform. For example, if the regular army was wearing, say, a blue coat with red facing, the musicians might be wearing a red coat with blue facing. So they stood out. The commander could immediately find them and give his orders.
Nice.
And so you can imagine these young boys. I mean, there they are. They're near the commander. They stand out, and they really couldn't defend themselves. They might carry a pistol or something, but they had really no means of defending themselves,
Yeah.
right in the middle of harm's way.
But they were short enough that everything was over. Yeah.
Yeah, and the British tended to fire high.
Yeah.
But at this battle, there was a 9-year-old drummer boy. The accounts talk about Dan Morgan, after the ending of the battle, was so elated with what happened that he picked up the drummer boy and gave him a kiss on both cheeks.
That's great.
Yeah. That was part of Morgan's letter to his commander, Nathaniel Greene, after the battle.
Yeah.
And he talked about the enemy's loss was 10 commissioned officers and over 100 rank and file killed and 200 wounded, 29 commissioned officers and about 500 privates, which fell into our hands with all their music. And by all their music, what he meant was all their instruments.